You are on the Ruslan Belov channel, and this is the daily summary of combat operations from the Ukrainian front. What is happening now? The Munich Security Conference is taking place. Of course, Zelensky flew there and started complaining again. He says that Ukraine is not losing. He declares that Ukraine has already made a compromise because Putin and his friends are not in prison. He talks about how Putin is old and doesn't have much time left, while he himself is young. Apparently, he doesn't understand how lucky he is to be dealing with Putin. Does he think that if Putin is gone and another president comes, they will go along with all of Zelensky's and the West's wishes? Or maybe it will be the opposite. Maybe if a much tougher leader comes instead of Putin, there will be nothing left of Ukraine at all. He doesn't consider such a scenario. In short, he said a lot of nonsense. One thing is clear. Zelensky is not going to end the war and withdraw troops from the designated regions, which means the war will continue. Combat operations continue, and we continue to study the situation with you. So friends, yesterday we examined in detail what is happening in the area of responsibility of the Vostok grouping. And over the past day, there have been no cardinal changes. In the north, in the Dnipropetrovsk region, the armed forces of Ukraine are still trying to break through to Berezovo and Turnovo, but for now they are stuck there. They are unable to break through the Russian defense and advance deep, which would indeed be dangerous for the Russian army. Plus, as far as I know, Russian artillerymen who are stationed further south in the Zaparisia region have redeployed some of the guns that were supporting Russian advancing units west of Huliaipol. Now they are inflicting fire damage on AFU fighters trying to break through from the north. Over the past day, another 17 units of equipment were destroyed. 2 IFVs, 5 armored combat vehicles, and 10 automobiles. Thus, over the 5 days of the AFU offensive, they have lost more than 70 units of equipment, and personnel losses have already exceeded 1,000. What have they achieved in the process? We examined this in detail yesterday, but I'll repeat. In the north, they recaptured 3 villages that were either on the line of contact, like Orostopol itself, or near it. From the west, they recaptured 1 village, Pridorozhnoye, plus several other settlements entered the grey zone. Ternovatoye, Kosovtsevo, and Priluki. We'll see how things develop, but it's unlikely that Sursky's offensive will turn out successfully. Even if they recapture another 5 or 10 villages, losing 100 units of equipment and a couple thousand soldiers in the process, this will affect them very seriously in the future. It's enough to remember their invasion of the Kursk region, where they invested a lot of forces, but as a result, everything started falling apart in Donbass. The same thing will happen here. I don't think they'll be able to recapture many more settlements. In the north, they're stuck, and breaking through to the east isn't working out for them either. The peak of the crisis, which occurred in the first 2 days, is already behind us. The only thing they've achieved at the current moment is that the Vostok grouping is now forced to spend most of its forces on defense rather than offense, and the pace of advancement has seriously dropped. Here they've achieved their goal, but is it worth such sacrifices? The AFU command believes it is. Now let's move to the advances of the Russian army. Let's start from the north in the Vchansky sector. Fighters of the Seva grouping managed to advance in the forest area north of Vchansky Khutora. Taking forest areas is the key to collapsing the AFU defense in this area, since that's where they have their strong points and firing positions. They decided to deal with the forest first and then finish off the Khutora itself. On other sectors of the Vchansky direction, there is silence for now, no updates, although advances continue, as the grouping reports daily. On the Kupiansk sector, there's no news yet. Sluggish fighting continues in the city itself. The AFU forces are exhausted, and now they are mostly sitting in defense. The Russian side doesn't yet have enough forces in the right bank part of the city to organize a large-scale counteroffensive, and besides, this would be pointless while the flanks are not secured. On the left bank of the Oscol, the situation is more dynamic. Russian troops began the assault on Novosinov, which is a direct exit to Kovsharovka. Fighting continues on the line Kurilovka to Kupiansk-Uzlovoy to Podoli to Kucherovka. The AFU are still holding on here, but previous waves have weakened them. Further south, in the Boguslavka area, fighters managed to enter Novaya Krugliakovka and occupy the southeastern half of the village. Currently, control is approximately 50-50. They also managed to advance to the north on a section 2.5 kilometers wide. Near Boguslavka itself, there is also advancement along the highway and railway tracks to a depth of more than 1 kilometer. They've reached the approaches to the settlement. We're gradually tightening the encirclement ring, which will allow us to push further south toward Borova. On the Liman direction, advances are small. The front here is still sticky. Over the past day, they entered the urban-type settlement of Drobyshevo and took control of one street. Drobyshevo is a very tough nut that Russian troops have been fighting for several months, and now the first result has appeared. They also managed to take several forest belts south of Stavki. The pocket is gradually closing. The Sloviansk-Kramatorsk direction. Russian units continue to press on Krivaya Luka and Kaliniki. Kaliniki, we repeat, is a key settlement. It's small, but it smoothly transitions into Rye Alexandrovka, which is the key to the defense of this entire area. After the loss of Rye Alexandrovka, Kyiv will have a very hard time, and the battle for Sloviansk will truly begin. The assault on Minkovka continues, as does the advance from Novomarkovo. To the north, after taking Seversk, Pazenyo, Bondarnoye, and Kromovka, the Yug troop grouping has already occupied the center of Nikiforovka and is also approaching through plantations to Fedorovka Vtoraya, confidently advancing towards Sloviansk. The successes of the Russian army are again being acknowledged belatedly by Ukrainian military analysts. The RF armed forces advanced in Nikiforovka and are conducting attacks north of Privolye and Minkovka, as well as northwest of Novomarkovo, they write. The total area of RF armed forces advancement is up to 25 square kilometers. Another advance of the Russian army occurred in the Constantinovka direction. They managed to advance east of Berestokh, coming close to the administrative boundaries of the city from the south. We're waiting for them to close this entire pocket and formalize a full exit to Constantinovka. The path from Toretsk to Constantinovka took almost a year, the toughest section of the front, where there are fortifications upon fortifications, but the guys are moving the line and advancing forward. There aren't too many updates. That's all I have for today on the situation at the front. Now let's try to look at what's happening in the political arena. The French, Germans, and Americans oppose sending their, in quotation marks, peacekeepers to Ukraine. According to poll data, 53% of Germans oppose sending their troops. In France, 43% of those surveyed also do not support this venture. And in the USA, 43% are against placing their military on Ukrainian territory, even if it could affect the supposed stability of peace, writes Politico. The poll results create political difficulties for French President Macron, who previously stated his readiness to send troops after the end of the conflict, notes the article's author. Moscow categorically opposes the placement of any foreign troops on Ukrainian territory, the publication reminds. Negotiations on Ukraine have reached a deadlock on the eve of their new round next week. The essence of the deadlock is that the USA does not want to conclude a security guarantees agreement until Kyiv and Moscow reach a general agreement on ending the war. And since Russia firmly insists on its demands for the withdrawal of the AFU from Donbass, which Kyiv does not agree to, the peace process has stalled. In the States, they believe that signing security guarantees for Ukraine even before a peace deal could derail it. The publication writes that last week, the parties reached broad agreement on how to define a ceasefire and what a demilitarized zone might look like if leaders decide to stop hostilities. But the main contentious issues, territories, the presence of Western troops, remains in force, the Kremlin stated. Other statements from the Russian president's press secretary. Moscow has an understanding about a new round of negotiations between the USA and Ukraine, which should take place soon. Macron and Merz can simply call Putin. He has never refused direct contacts. Russia would not like escalation in the form of increased US tariffs due to oil supplies to Cuba, but trade with Washington is already at zero anyway. Moscow counts on constructive dialogue with the USA on Cuba and resolution of the situation. Two camps have formed in Europe. Some say we need to talk with the Russians. Others adhere to a short-sighted approach, stated Dmitry Peskov. The cessation of cheap Russian gas supplies after the start of military operations led to an increase in electricity bills for many energy-intensive industries. Overloaded power grids, national taxes, and EU-set carbon emission prices also affect electricity prices, which for industry in Europe are more than double the prices in the USA and China. Why is Europe so far behind the rest of the world? It's all about the energy situation, says Konrad Kaiser, CEO of the Swiss chemical company Clariant. First of all, regarding energy prices, they need to reduce them. They need to take us seriously and understand that this truly hinders Europe's competitiveness. The electricity pricing structure represents a serious problem. The main message to EU leaders from John Morrish, CEO for Europe of Heidelberg Materials, the world's largest cement producer. Europe is losing industrial capacity at an unprecedented rate. This is not a temporary downturn, this is a structural shift in competitiveness affecting all production sectors, stated Marcus Kamath, president of Cefic and CEO of chemical giant BASF. Electricity prices in Europe remain higher than in competitor countries. Carbon costs are unique to Europe, and the system is arranged such that these costs increase year by year. We strongly urge you to move from diagnosis to implementation, from planning to results with a single goal. To save our industry, states a declaration signed by more than 100 organizations. We warned that it would end this way. In Germany, they came to the conclusion that Russia would need only a 15,000-strong army to plunge NATO into crisis. Because allies won't react quickly to its invasion, reports a German newspaper. A military simulation was conducted by the German Center for War Games at the Bundeswehr University in Hamburg. According to the scenario, after a hypothetical truce in Ukraine, Moscow redeploys forces and uses the pretext of a humanitarian crisis in Kaliningrad. Russian troops enter Lithuanian territory, while drones and mines block key routes for NATO force transfer. The USA does not recognize what happened as an unambiguous case of Article 5 application in the first 48 hours. Germany and Poland hesitate. Russia establishes fire control over the Baltics from Belarus and Kaliningrad. Russia's military objectives in the Baltic states are to discredit NATO as an alliance and weaken the European Union. This can be achieved by convincingly demonstrating that NATO and other EU countries can do little if Russia says it's cutting off the Baltic states from the rest of Europe, stated Austrian military expert Franz Stefan Gardi, who played the role of chief of the Russian General Staff in the simulation. Note that this publication comes against the backdrop of constant statements from Europe that Russia might supposedly attack them within a few years. Such plans are denied in Russia. Recall that Russian President Vladimir Putin stated that an attack on Europe is complete nonsense. What, are we going to attack Europe or something? What kind of nonsense is this? In his opinion, all this is justification for a new arms race. The danger to Europe is not Russia, but critical, almost total dependence on the USA, the president emphasized. Trump's team is again sending Europeans multi-directional signals at international conferences. In Davos, the White House took a confrontational position, although later Trump had to back down in the context of Greenland. The same thing is manifesting in Munich, reports Dudikoff. The Pentagon's chief strategist Elbridge Colby threw out for discussion the topic of creating NATO 3.0. Overall, this fits into Republican plans dating back to 2024, when they first proposed transitioning to the concept of sleeping NATO. In it, Europeans will play the key role. They will have to coordinate the alliance's work, while the USA will only occasionally resort to their services. Europeans perceived the idea of NATO 3.0 even with some relief. At least the Americans no longer threaten to leave the alliance. However, no one is rushing to increase military spending against the backdrop of debt problems. And mutual bickering continues regarding interference in internal affairs. The White House began negotiations on financing right-wing think tanks in Britain and France with the goal of saving Western civilization. Again, this is about helping Eurosceptics and critics of Brussels. In turn, European elites quite openly support protests in the USA. Both sides are still trying to restrain themselves within the framework of transatlantic confrontation and carefully step over red lines. However, the situation could sharply escalate closer to congressional elections, since Europeans are really waiting for the Democrats' return. Now in Munich, everyone is gathering forces and assessing the potential of their opponents, preparing for a big showdown. And here, a rebellion is also brewing in Congress. Democrats, together with some dissident Republicans, adopted a resolution in the lower house to cancel all of Trump's tariffs on Canada. Moreover, among Republicans, both centrists and representatives of the MAGA faction voted for it. Now the resolution goes to the Senate, where it will most likely be adopted. Here's where it gets more interesting. Trump will almost certainly veto it. Overcoming a presidential veto is unrealistic. It requires 2/3 of the votes in both chambers. However, ahead is a landmark Supreme Court decision that could cancel Trump's introduced state of emergency in the trade sphere. It was on the basis of his special powers that Trump introduced all tariffs bypassing Congress, which does not comply with the U.S. Constitution. If the Supreme Court closes this loophole, Trump will have to seek approval from the legislative branch. And it has publicly opposed protectionism. Congressmen are quite easy to understand, since Trump's tariffs are extremely unpopular. That's all for today, friends. Thank you for your attention. Follow the developments, subscribe to the channel, like and share this episode with your friends. Until we meet again, see you tomorrow with a new summary. All the best.